Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Scott Henderson, and my co-host is Dr. J. We are especially excited for our guest coming on today. Jason, who do we have?
Well, Scott, when we were first introduced to our guest, I was excited for a couple of reasons. And I'll get to that. But Kevin is originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He's married and has two kids, but he lives down in Florida. I think he said Tampa Bay area. The cool thing is this guy is all about in real estate and investing in real estate for cash flow. In fact, he is the host of a podcast called Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow. So this is fun to have him on there. He has decades worth of experience and multi-hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate transactions under his belt. He is an expert in the arena of mobile home parks in particular, which is very cool. Some of my earliest recollections are when building a mobile home parks that my father and his twin brother built and owned for a long time. In fact, I learned to drive one day when Dad threw me the keys. It was a manual transmission. I think I was 12. He says, "You got to go get the truck, bring those concrete forms down here." And I a bunch of times, but I finally figured out a clutch. I was able to bring it down. That was the beginning. So it was kind of fun to be able to come full circle here. Kevin Bupp, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Jason, Scott, thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here, and it's funny. I think that's the speaking of a manual transmission. I think that's probably the best auto theft deterrent that exists today. Is which you can't really buy auto transmission or manual transmissions any longer, but if you could, probably no one that would be out there stealing cars would know how to actually drive the thing.
That's true. That's true. That's funny. My daughter asked us the other day, she says, "Dad, I want to learn to drive a manual transmission." I was like, I don't have one to teach you. We're going to have to find a vehicle to do it.
I think a Jeep. I think that's about it. Probably about one of the few that you can get that still have it.
Well, she has a friend who has an old truck and it's a manual transmission. Okay. And so she wanted to learn to do it. I thought it's kind of cool. Anyway, Kevin, so how is it that you got into real estate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always joke and say that real estate found me. I didn't find it. So I just, by happenstance, I was going to, community college, taking classes, not really sure what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I was sitting bar in the evenings. I was 19 at the time. And I happened to be dating a girl. And that girl, her mother was dating a fella. And that fellow was a local real estate investor. His name was David, and I happened to become friends with him just by visiting her at her home and seeing him around. And so that was my first introduction to it. My parents were both work. They both worked 9 to 5. Very much a middle class blue collar family. Went on one vacation a year, never went without, but definitely didn't have any business owners or entrepreneurs in our family. And I would say that when I met David, it was just he was a big deal then. I mean, he was a I guess he gets in the grand scheme of things, he was a small time real estate investor, but he owned about 40 units and had been doing it for many, many years, for 2+ decades. And so to me, like he was a huge deal. I mean, to me, like he was incredibly successful, had really nice cars, had a lot of flexibility in his lifestyle, which is one of the things I identified early on, that he was always around when I thought, old folks were supposed to be working, they're supposed to be at their job. But anyway, that's how I got introduced to real estate. And I just happened to work for him basically for free I made him an offer once I got to know him a little bit. I made him an offer to work for him for free so that I could learn the business. And I felt it was something that I could wrap my arms around. It was something I was excited about. And I hadn't found anything else in life at that point that I was excited to really, put my effort and energy into. And so that's what happened. I ended up working for him for about a year and a half. So in between tending bar in the evenings and taking classes 3 days a week, I would be at his home office, out in the field, dropping off leases, picking up supplies from Home Depot, picking up coffee, whatever he needed, just so I could be around him and listen to him talk to, buyers, sellers, realtors, contractors, all the like. And he was kind of a solopreneur. So he was kind of the one all be all. And so I got to hear a lot. I got to be involved in a lot and just be surrounded by, his business in an intimate level and just get a better understanding of what was going on. So that was the start of it. And I ended up buying my first property at the age of 20. And and it was off and running. So fast forward, I've owned hundreds of single family homes, hundreds of apartment units, just about every other type of commercial real estate, but really landed on what we focus on today, landed on mobile home parks back in 2011. And then we also buy parking. So parking lots and parking garages. That's a fairly newer vertical into our business. We've been buying those for about 5 years. But since that time, I've done. Actually, it's over. I need to update the bio that you have there. About $500 million of transactions over the last, I guess, 2+ decades. And it's been a fun ride. So today we're solely focused on mobile home parks and parking lots. Like those are our two verticals. That's where we spend all of our energy and effort, and own assets in. At present time, 14 different states, and have owned in as many as I think 21 at this point, and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, if it's not fun, don't do it. I love it.
That's right.
So
That's
tell
right.
us why, and maybe the top three reasons why parking lots and mobile home parks.
Yeah, back when I was introduced to mobile home parks, and parking kind of it follows the same storyline. I'd never known anybody that owned a mobile home park. I knew somebody owned them, but it was one of those assets I'd never considered. Single family rentals were popular, self storage was popular, retail, office, industrial, kind of all the major food groups. But there was never any chatter. I didn't know anybody in the mobile home park space, and what I came to find out is if you knew, you knew, and if you didn't, you didn't. Right? It was kind of like a good old boy industry. And anyway, I was introduced to a good old boy that happened to start buying mobile home parks post his banking days, retirement. And I had lunch with him back in 2011, and I was introduced to him by a friend, not for the purpose of learning about mobile home parks, but just for the purpose of expanding my network and getting to meet someone that's in the industry and just talk shop. Well, anyway, fast forward, that 30-minute or that 2-hour lunch conversation turned into me really changing my focus and wanting to go buy a mobile home park and kind of test his thesis. And so, but he really, the things that he opened my eyes to that really resonated with me, back to these top three things is number one is the turnover rate is substantially lower than that of a traditional multifamily. So if you're trying to compare like an apples to apples, like, mobile home parks are a multifamily, they're just a different form of it. But the turnover, whereas in an apartment, the average renter, typically turns every 16 to 18 months. A mobile home park, we've got residents in some of our communities that have been there 50 years. It's like a subdivision. If they do want to move, they put their home up for sale. They pay the lot rent until they're ready to move. Someone else moves in, and they assume that lot rent responsibility. So you don't have that lull in income that you might get when you have a turnover in a rental unit. So that was one of the big ones. That was huge for me, because obviously turnovers are expensive. The other one was there wasn't as much competition, at least back then. It's a little bit different today. But it was kind of, like I said, it was a good old boys network. And so you could buy back then mobile home parks at a much higher cap rate than that of what a comparable multifamily might have been trading for. That's not as prevalent today, but it was one of the key factors that really turned me onto it. The management responsibility is significantly less. Typically, unless we've got some very large communities, 600, 700, 800 spaces. And so it knows even if we don't own a lot of the homes, we still have maintenance staff and groundskeepers. But in a lot of our communities, 100, 150 lots, we have one manager. Even up to like 200 lots, we have one community manager that that oversees everything. And if that was an apartment complex, we would have much more staffing than that. And so the general maintenance and upkeep and management responsibility is significantly less than in a mobile home park than that of a traditional multifamily. So that was one of the other big ones. And then lastly was just the fragmentation of the marketplace. Like he really spoke to that, and that's still present today. So there's only a small percentage, less than 20% of the mobile home parks throughout the U.S. are actually owned by what would be classified as a larger professional or institutional type operator, and that means that the remainder are still very much owned by mom and pops. Maybe the original developer, maybe it's someone's second line, but still a non-institutional, non-professional type of operator. And what that allows for is folks like us to come in and actually create some better efficiencies, better management practices, and find value by doing that. Whereas the larger apartment space is really consolidated now. 85% of large apartment units throughout the country are owned by larger institutional groups or professional operators. That is not the case in the mobile home park space. So I saw opportunity with all those things, and really the same exact thing exists with parking, which is what attracted us to it. It was kind of one of those oddball industries that we saw opportunity. We saw so many similarities in what originally excited us about manufactured housing, a decade ago, which is why we jumped into that space. And it's still like that today. It's still very fragmented. A few institutional owners, but mostly, if it's not owned by the municipality, it's owned by a local investor. Sometimes generational families that own these parking lots or parking garages in these different locations throughout the country. So, both very attractive niches have been very profitable.
Have you developed any parking lots, or you're simply purchasing pre-existing?
No, we have not, and that's a really good point you bring up. In fact, a lot of municipalities, kind of similar to that of mobile home parks, they don't want new parking supply. And there's this NIMBY syndrome that exists with mobile home parks, like not in my backyard. So it's very difficult to get new product developed. It's been historically difficult for the last couple of decades, just for that reason alone. It's also not the best a tax base for the counties. Although they want to fix the affordable housing problem, they can make a lot more money in tax revenue if they pretty much put anything else in that location, right? Because mobile home parks have a lot of space, a lot of acreage because they're horizontal in nature. Whereas they could put a mixed use project, basically anything else, and get a much higher tax base from it than that of a mobile home park. But parking, lots of cities have actually, number one, they don't allow new parking because there's already a lot of cities might have had excess supply, upwards of 10, 20 years ago. But what's ultimately occurred is that, lots of these surface lots that were, maybe once a building that got torn down, turned into a surface lot, they've been redeveloped, or they're being redeveloped. And on top of that, lots of cities have actually eliminated parking minimum requirements from new developments. So developers now, instead of being forced to build, X amount of parking per 1,000 square feet, they basically can put in whatever they feel is necessary to serve their need. And that's it. No more, no less, as much as they need. And so there's no new parking getting built. And so what we like to do is just identify the existing locations. We know there's a fairly significant barrier to entry to get into markets and build new. And in most areas, it's not allowed. They don't, cities don't want new parking to be built, new parking to be developed, and developers aren't developing excess with their projects. And so we try to find existing and just basically run it better. Find someone that's been operating inefficiently, which happens quite often, that has old technology, old operating systems in place that we can upgrade and more efficiently maintain pricing strategies and ultimately drive the revenue. So we do not develop it. We buy existing. Not saying that we would never develop, but at this point in time, we find enough problem properties that are in great locations that we know that we can fix, and then we can get in cash flow day one. That's kind of our game. Development, you don't get cash flow day one. We like cash flow day one, with the ability to continue driving that revenue as we fix the problems that are in place.
So most people are going to sit and I know what's going on in their head, like parking. How does that generate revenue? Walk us through that business model just from a 500-foot view.
Yeah, everyone, I think, probably that's listening, if you're old enough to drive a car and you have driven a car, then you've probably paid to park somewhere, whether it be at maybe it's a courthouse or a sports venue or a music venue or going out to eat, whatever it might be. Maybe you work in an office, but most folks have paid to park. And so, it's simply that. You pay for usage of a parking spot in a respective area. Now, a lot of parking makes up the minority piece of our portfolio. And the only reason being that a lot of parking that's been built, that exists in areas that we would like to own, a lot of it historically had been built to primarily service office tenants. In fact, a lot of times there's, adjoining parking garages that were specifically built for one office tower. It might have some transient traffic or other revenue drivers, but it's predominantly from the office environment. And so we don't like office. We're not a big fan of it. I don't know what the future looks like. It doesn't look all that bright for office. I think where office is at today, I think it's probably about as good as it's going to get as far as, truly people getting back to the workplace. I think we've kind of found our equilibrium to a certain degree. Maybe some markets will see an slight increase over the next, couple of years, but I do feel that we found that equilibrium. And so a lot of parking we look at, if it's predominantly relying upon office parkers, people coming to the office building and paying to park, we tend to pass on it. Because I can't fix that problem. And so, to speak to your point of from a high level point of view, we've got 5 parking demand drivers. We've got 5 boxes we have to check. So when we look at a deal, It can service office, but that office demand can't make up more than 20% of the overall parkers in that garage. And so that way, if that office ever truly goes away, that demand goes away, we're not sitting with zero cash flow. And so that's a part. So we've got office parkers that are coming in and they're going to work, and they're either their company or them is paying us a monthly or daily rate to park in our garage. We got government buildings. That's another one. Courthouses and other different types of government buildings. So that's very consistent revenue. Most of the time, it's from the folks that are going to the courthouse, not necessarily the people that work at the courthouse. We've got, football arenas, baseball stadiums, music venues, those types of things. That's huge. And then we've got daytime transient traffic, people that are just coming during the day for various purposes. And then you got nighttime transient traffic. Those are the other boxes that need to be checked. So, bars, whatever, nighttime entertainment. We need 5 of those boxes checked in order for it to make sense for us, with only 20% or less being for office, or we pass on it. So that's it. People pay for us to park, and it's a seemingly simple but somewhat very complex business. From a high level 10,000 point of view, people are paying for a hourly spot, monthly spot in our parking garage or parking lot. On a very complex level, the pricing, it changes on a regular basis. We've got dynamic pricing schedules that adjust based on supply demand factors, time of day, time of year, special events. And so it could be hourly rate, it could be a flat rate, depending on what's going on, and we adjust it on the fly. And so it does become very complex, but again, that's where that's where we've been able to extract a lot of profit from buying a garage that might have historically been owned by a mom and pop, where it's $3 an hour, no matter what time of year, no matter what's going on, it's $3 an hour. We know we can come in and adjust that hourly rate, but also push the rates quite a bit when there's special events occurring in the area.
Love it. I was in New York City with my wife and 3 daughters recently. We went to Wicked on Broadway, and we needed to find a place to park. And I'd been watching all day long because we were in the city all day long, kind of twirling around doing stuff. And then, man, when it came time to park to go to the show, it was like wham, the rate was triple at least of what it was otherwise. So I thought of it at the time. So this is a pretty good model, because your maintenance is not too much, right? Yeah, you've got to maintain it and everything, but not like broken toilets and plumbing and electrical and all the other stuff you have in multifamily. That's pretty neat.
So, I mean, service lots, there's really nothing to maintain. I mean, you've got asphalt and you might have curb stops, but and there might be some equipment. There could be gates. It depends what type of system you have. But really, you're right. There's really not much else to upkeep. Parking garages depends. Where you own them. If you own them in environments where there's snow and then salt, that becomes problematic years down the road if the garage hasn't been maintained. If they're not continually waterproofing the concrete, what happens? Concrete develops cracks. Water makes its way into the cracks. Salt makes its way in there as well, gets to the rebar, and basically can rot those things out from the inside out. And so that is a big concern. We hire engineers to spend quite a bit of money on due diligence when we're looking at parking garages, like actual structures that are in environments such as that, where there's, again, snow and ice.
So Kevin, you've published a book, and I failed to say that in the introduction of you. It's called Investing for Cash Flow, or The Cash Flow Investor. I'm trying to remember what it is. Oh, it's right behind you. Sorry. The Cash Flow Investor. Give us a quick synopsis of your book and why it was that you published that book.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a labor of love for a number of years. Launched, I guess it's been about a year and a half since we launched it. But basically, I've got 20 years experience. I've owned just about every type of real estate. I feel like I've been involved in some very complex transactions. I've learned a lot along the way, and so the book is really it's a mix of my story, kind of lessons I've learned along the way, mistakes I've made, what I would do second time around, given the opportunity, which I lost everything in 2008 and then kind of rebuilt it starting in 2011 with mobile home parks. So it's part me. And then the other half of the book is really, it's more related to, I've had 2 primary mentors in my life, but I have had many others, in addition to those 2 primaries. And a lot of those mentors have come as a result of the 1,000+ interviews I've done on my podcast. I've made really good relationships with a number of folks I've interviewed over the years that are light years ahead of where I'm at, and I've taken their golden nuggets and their tips and strategies and integrated them to our own business. And I've shared a lot of those key items inside that book as well, just things that I've learned along the way, and just, again, advice I've taken from folks that have been down that road before, have seen further than I, and have my value, my business, the value of my business has improved because of that. And so a lot of that's all written in that book there. So it was I guess a 2 decade plus brain dump of everything I've learned in the business, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between.
So I'm sure in the book you talk about starting over 2008, 2009,
Yeah,
correct?
that's correct.
Do you talk at all, like, I'm thinking from an investor standpoint, I'm going to come
Mm-hmm.
give you money around that time. You just went upside down. How was that, and how did you find traction with investors again?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our business was structured a little differently back then. So historically, what we used to, and most of our portfolio was single family homes. So a lot of what we do when we worked with private investors, a lot of that was related to just the acquisition. So we'd go buy, call it five properties over a period of a month and a half or 2 months, with private money, just, debt structure. We would use that money to buy and then basically fund the renovations. And then once we had those units renovated, and most of the time we were going to rent them after the fact. We weren't flippers. We were just basically buy and hold. And so we weren't doing $50,000-$60,000 top to bottom renovations. We were basically getting these things rent ready. And so once we did that, we could do it in anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the severity of the renovation. Once we had them done, we would take a collective portfolio of anywhere from 5, as many as 10, depending on the values, and go get a commercial loan in place on those properties. And so there wasn't a lot of, when we ran into trouble, we didn't have a lot of investor capital per se, tied up into our deals. A lot of them were, we had a few maybe deals that were kind of working the interim, but we were able to, resolve any of the issues that we had with private lenders. Because back then, when things really started to hit the fan, banks didn't know what to do. They didn't have loss mitigation departments. They didn't have any structure in place to do workouts, loan workouts. They did years down the road. They figured out they had to, but initially there was no process in place. However, with private lenders, we could talk to them. They saw what was going on. We could work through that with them. We worked out structures to where we got them all paid back, and when we made them whole. The banks are really the ones that we had a challenge with, and inevitably what made us finally just kind of like throw our hands in the air, because what ultimately occurred was we owned everything in Florida. Florida was a very different market back then than it is today. It was really relying upon construction. Lots of jobs were relying upon the construction trade. And when the music stopped, the music stopped. There was no more homes being built. Homes weren't selling. Folks actually moved away from the area. And so we actually had a fairly significant drop in our occupancy, as well as in our rents. We had to start giving rent concessions, and we were competing against an excess supply of inventory in the area. And so, trying to work with the bank, saying, "Hey guys, like, we're negative now. I mean, like, we're not covering the, debt coverage, service ratio. We're not covering it on a monthly basis. Like, we can't do this much longer. Can we work something out? Can we restructure these loans? Can we just give us some time to work through this challenging period?" And it fell on deaf ears. And we tried to work at it for a year and a half. And it's not, I don't know if it's that they didn't care. I think they were overwhelmed like everybody was. Right. And I also I don't think that they didn't realize how severe it was until they were, in the thick of it, that it was going to get worse before it got any better. And that this was going to be a progression of many years, not just like a blip on the radar. So by the time that they got their act together and really started building out loss mitigation departments and loan modification programs, we were already done. Like we had to pull the cord. We couldn't hang on. And so we had to let everything go. So back to your original question, we didn't have investors that got hurt during that process. However, it still creates challenges with, trying to go back and restart and raise capital again, right? Like track record's kind of tarnished. I think it's all about just being vulnerable and being willing to identify maybe where some weaknesses were, things that you could have done better, and just being self-aware and having a better way to skin that cat the second time around, being able to actually convey that and articulate that to an investor and get them on board with whatever that new business plan is. So our new business plan, the first deal I ever pitched after all this happened, 3.5 years went by, was a mobile home park that we were buying up in Atlanta, a distressed property. It wasn't anything outside of our wheelhouse. It was a major renovation, major turnaround. It was an REO. It was practically empty when we bought it. We were putting some of our own capital into it. We put about 100 grand of our own capital. We ended up raising 200 grand from a private investor, one of the guys that actually had lent us money, prior to the crash, and shared with him the business idea, the strategy, kind of a worst case scenario, best case scenario, what that looked like for him, what his security looked like. And he got on board. And that was the first one. We knocked that one out of the park, and here we go again, right? Like, just, like, I know what I'm doing. The challenges that happened in 2008 caught a lot of people off guard. There weren't a lot of things that we did irresponsibly with our portfolio. We had low leverage. Our average loan to value across our portfolio back then was like 62%. It was really low, but occupancies dropped like a rock. Rents went down. Everyone says they always go up. That's not the truth at all. In fact, right now, it's funny that 3 years ago, the general sentiment was that, like, rents have historically gone up over the last 14, 15 years, blah, blah, blah. Like, that was the sound clips and sound bites that were being spewed. However, if you follow data over the last year and a half, multifamily across many markets throughout the country, and just rentals in general, mostly multifamily related, because a lot of new supply coming on, rents have actually teetered down over the last year and a half to 2 years. So it was a challenging time. We learned a lot from it, but also just we own it. It was what it was, and we're big boys about it. And I think a lot of our investors respected that and got back on board after the fact. So I'm not going to say we'd have a challenge raising money. I'd say the bigger challenge was probably with the banks. When it came time to get bank financing, that was probably more difficult to do than that of getting a private individual that was a business owner themselves or had capital to believe in the business plan and understand the people kind of running the show behind it, myself and my partner. The bank's a different story. To them, it's very black and white. Whatever's on your credit is what the truth is. I don't care what your business plan looks like. I don't care how much money you can make on this deal. We're not giving you a loan. So we had a very challenging time getting loans for a number of years, probably about 5 or 6 years before that really came to pass.
I gotcha. So on, like, the far side of the perspective, then we're now today, do you raise, if an investor wants to come and invest with you, do you raise money on a deal to deal basis? Is it, hey, I got $250,000, here you go, and then you hold on to it in an account?
No, so we used to do deal specific syndication. So we raise everything through a Reg D 506C offering. So only accredited investors can we take capital from. Historically, I guess up until about when we started raising capital in that format, up until about 2017, that's how we did it. We raised for just individual deals, one deal by one deal by one deal. But what we found is that we were really good at finding deals. We were really good at operating deals. And the biggest hiccup was the logistics of actually closing a number of deals all within a short time frame of within a quarter. We had 3 or 4 deals closing every quarter. We found that very logistically challenging doing individual raises for each. Just the same legal paperwork, documentation, just accounting was a nightmare, having each individual deal stand alone when we had 10, 15, 20 of them. And so what we decided to do in 2017 is we kind of on a whim decided that it would be more efficient to do it in a fund structure and put it out there in a fund structure, give our investors more diversity. Their one investment across could be as many as 10, 15 mobile home parks in different geographic locations. And so we decided to give it a test run. We launched our first fund back in 2017. It was well received, gave us a lot of flexibility as far as on the buying side, gave us a lot more leverage and buying power when we were making offers, and allowed us to move a lot faster than that of what we had historically been doing, trying to do one deal respectively at each time. So now today, all we do is funds. Not saying that we would never do a standalone deal, but we basically are right now. We just launched our 4th fund, launched in October of last year. It's a $100 million fund. It's a combination of both mobile home parks and parking. Currently, it's got I think about 65 million of assets that are actually in the fund, which represent about $30 million of actual equity that's been raised in that $100 million fund. And again, we found that it's a much more attractive vehicle for our investors. And most of our investors have been with us now for a long time. I found when we launched that first fund, track record was key. I think it'd be very difficult just to come out of the woodwork with a fund, without having any prior track record or case studies to kind of go by. We had a lot to speak to individual deals, say, hey guys, we're going to do this exact same thing, but we're going to do it collectively underneath one umbrella, multiple different deals underneath one umbrella. So again, offer a lot of diversity for the investors that are getting involved. And it was a hit. And it's been a great run ever since.
So I assume you offer them a pref rate and
We do.
then back end
Yeah.
and all that thing.
Yeah, so
What
our
is your-
current fund, it's got three different classes depending on how much capital is invested. Our minimum investment's 100 grand. We've got an 8 pref, 9 pref, or 10 pref. 8 pref for those that invest 100 to 249,000, 9 pref for 250 to 499,000, and then 10 pref for 500K and above. And then it's a 70-30 split.
And have you found having that tiered structure push people to the higher amounts?
Mhm. Yeah, because
To where you're having a higher percentage? Because I mean, we've
it
got a
does.
fund as well, and you know, you often say, I don't want to always bounce on the minimum. I'd like to have more
Yeah.
higher people, right?
It
And
does.
track record helps, but if you that it's a good idea having a tiered structure like that. Then maybe they'd say, well, man, maybe I'm going to go for another percentage. I mean, it's 12% more from
Yeah.
8 to 9, right? That's actually a 12% more return.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then what we allow, how we have our operating agreement written is, let's say that we get, one of our investors comes in with 100K, and then 8 months later, most of our funds stay open for 2 years. The last one actually we had open, we were actively raising and buying for just about 3 years. So, but 2 years is this current one. So let's say someone came in the beginning with 100K. They got that 8 pref. And then, as time went on, they got to see some more of the deals we put in there. They're even more excited. They came into some more money. And let's say they're like, gosh, guys, I've got $300,000 or 400,000. Let's use $400,000 as the example. Coming my way, need a home for it. Really like how this thing's been performing. Like the new deals that you put in there. I'd like to give you that 400K, but can you bump me? Can you give me some preferential treatment? Can you get me into that highest class, since I've collectively have given you 500K, and that's what we do. So whereas we might have been able to bump them into that nine pref just for that 400K, and then still kept them at the 8 pref for the 100K. We collectively put it together and give them the benefit of the doubt, and basically put them up in that 10 pref category. And so we allow them to do the bolt-ons all the way through the duration of the fund, so they can cumulatively get up into a different class if they'd like to. And we found a lot that definitely gets traction later on down the road. And we've done that in the last 2 funds as well. And we've definitely seen a lot of success with it.
Awesome. Yeah, we're coming a little bit to our time limit here, and I want to keep going. That's just not the case, and really appreciate it, Kevin. Let's kind of do some summarizing here. If you were to be talking to the average investor out there, Main Street, right? Which you do, I think, a lot on your podcast. What are some, pointers that you would give them when they're getting into real estate, or if they want to, say, invest in a syndication or something? What are some pitfalls or advice that you'd give people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing would be is determine who you want to be. Do you want to be an active, or do you want to be a passive investor? Because they're two very different worlds. Take two very different mindsets and skill sets. And so one's not better than the other. It just depends on where you're at and what you want to do. And so I think make that determination first. And then after that, assuming that you want to go active, there's lots of education out there, way more than what existed 20 years ago when I got into it. Back then you had to buy, you had to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning and get some course off the TV. Right. But now there's lots of podcasts, lots of information material. There's conferences. There's no lack of resources out there, but I would say that you can get overwhelmed very quickly with all the information that's floating around. I would say if you're going to be the active investor, really hone in on and focus on one thing. Just get the blinders on, go deep into one thing. Don't go wide, because you're going to hear 1,000 other people saying about how they made money doing X, Y, Z, and you can make money doing just about anything. There's 1,001 different ways to make money in real estate. Pick one and become the expert in it. Give yourself the time to learn it, figure out who else is doing it in that you can surround yourself with, that's been there, done that, a couple of years track record, see if you can add value to their business, become part of what they're doing. Again, just accelerate your learning process. I mean, that'd be the advice I'd give someone to go active. And as far as passive, I mean, like that's a slightly different skill set. I think that's more of being able to perform due diligence on people and the sponsors, and actually understand what you're getting yourself into. If you understand that it's a good fit for for kind of your wealth plan. If you determine that type of investing is a good fit for your wealth plan, that's one thing. But really figuring out who to put your money with, right? Because in syndications, it's all about the jockey at that point in time. The horse can be great, but if the jockey doesn't know what he's doing, then it's irrelevant. And so just really understanding how to do due diligence on a team, figure out what their background looks like, dig into their financials, look at their personal balance sheets, look at the company balance sheets, and just understand the overall financial health of the organization and see if you can get on board with that. Because that's the most important. The asset's important, but not nearly as important as the people that are actually running the show. So, and there's lots of information on how to do that as well. Again, podcasts and books and resources. But yeah, I think that's what I would give as far as advice.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate all the time you've spent with us. If our viewers and listeners would like to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about what we do at Sunrise, our company, Sunrise Capital Investors, you can go over to investwithsunrise.com, and we got our current offering up there. You can get access to that. Take it for a test drive, see what we have going on in there. In fact, we're pretty transparent. We provide a lot more details on our current offerings and the deals that are inside those offerings than a lot of other operators might. Like, we go as far as putting up current appraisals, an overview of the actual business plan. We put up third-party environmental, inspections, environmental reports, surveys, all kinds of details, so you can go in and actually dig a little deeper, just from a high level, but actually get a really good understanding of who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And then as far as me personally, kevinbupp.com is my website. I also host my real estate podcast called Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow over there. And my last name is pretty unique, and so you can type that into pretty much any social channel and probably track me down pretty quickly.
Awesome.
And it's safe to assume that your book is on Amazon.
It is. That's correct. Yep.
Okay. We'll put a link to that and everything else in the show notes, everyone. So go ahead, Scott.
And if you'd like to connect with Jason or I, make sure to hit us up on one of the social media platforms or shoot us an email. Again, all the links will be in the show notes down below. Last, remember that mastering your millions all starts with your mind and your team. Make sure they are the best. We will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.